just turned into this huge web
Mm-hmm.
of relationships and connections involving Yale, Harvard, UCLA, Tulane,
Stanford for sure.
Stanford. So it's not just some mad scientist in a basement somewhere a long time ago.
Right.
It's very organized. It's the main medical schools and a lot of the major figures in psychiatry. For instance, when I was even in medical school, but in psychiatry, I heard about Carl Rogers,
Mm-hmm.
who was a psychologist who's identified with this kind of therapy called client-centered therapy. And the kind of stereotype of that is with the client's in there for a therapy session and says, "I'm really mad at my mom." And the therapist says, "I hear you saying that you're really mad at your mom."
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of touchy-feely, and you're supposed to, number one, value the client, and it's all centered on the best interests of the client. It's also called humanistic therapy.
Right.
So it's like Mr. Nice Guy therapy. Well, lo and behold, Carl Rogers was cleared at top secret. He was a CIA contractor himself, ran experiments for the CIA on subjects, which he published in psychology journals, and he was on the board of a CIA front organization that funneled money from the CIA inside the MKUltra program to the front organization, which then gave grants to academics who didn't realize it was CIA money.
Incredible.
And so a lot of these major figures were directly involved.
You know, and that's the, when I said I was disgusted earlier, my disgust didn't only come from the fact that these things were actually carried out, you know, but it was just as much for the way in which they were carried out, like you're talking about now, covertly, oftentimes without informed consent of the subject or victim or whatever you want to call them.
A lot of apologists will always say, "Oh, well, that was a long time ago. We didn't have the same ethical standards now.
Huh.
We have different kinds of committees now."
Right.
It's completely bogus.
It is.
These experiments violated everything going all the way back to the Hippocratic Oath,
Sure.
the Nuremberg Code, Helsinki Codes, every ethical code that's been in the last 2,000 plus years. Specifically, these were crimes against humanity that would have got a lot of press if they were done by Nazi doctors during the Second World War.
Well, you know, you read my mind there, Dr. Ross. I was just going to say that if we have a moment, maybe we could talk about Paperclip a little bit.
Sure.
And about again the documented evidence that we have of who a lot of these guys were that came in initially and where they came from and what their background was and that sort of thing.
When I started to get into this, I realized that I had to get a kind of broad general background. Because a lot of these facts, I'll describe some of the experiments in a little while, but a lot of the facts are so fantastic and unbelievable. If you don't have a context to put them in, you're just kind of overwhelmed by the boggle factor, and you can't compute that it could all be real.
Oh man, it's taken me years to reconcile some of the things that I've learned, and that's a limited number of things, but it really does take a while to be able to accept it, I guess.
Because if I just made a statement out of the blue, did you know that Nazi psychiatrists who did experiments in the death camps were brought over here secretly and have been running experiments on psychiatric patients for the last 50 years? I mean, you'd think I was nuts, right?
Right.
But
I don't tonight, though.
No, you don't tonight. That's because you know about Project Paperclip.
Yeah.
And there's a number of books on this. Again, it's all documented, all declassified. The problem was at the end of the Second World War, really in the last year, especially the last 6 months of the war, and then the first 6 months, year after the end of the war, there was a lot of German scientists who had expertise in everything under the sun, basically,
mm-hmm.
who were now up for grabs. And so the British, the French, the Russians, and the Americans were all scrambling to try and recruit these people.
Okay.
And the problem was that many of them were Nazi war criminals. And so they couldn't be brought into the United States because the State Department wouldn't issue them a visa. So what happened is the CIA and the military together created a series of projects, of which the best known is Project Paperclip. And that was basically to find, identify, recruit these guys, and then bring them into the country, routing them around the State Department visa requirements. And this included Werner von Braun,
mm-hmm.
whose V-2 rocket factory was basically run by labor from Camp Dora. When U.S. troops liberated Camp Dora, they found 6,000 corpses on the ground. So Werner von Braun was directly involved in working, mostly Polish, I think it was, labor camp prisoners to death in his V-2 rocket factory, and he had direct on-site knowledge of that, which makes him a Nazi war criminal. So therefore, he couldn't come into the United States. There was rocket people. Most of the people who set up the initial American rocket program, everything, ball bearings, film, lubricants, propulsion, and also physicians, a man named Albertus Struckold. People on his administrative level in Nazi Germany, people who reported to him, and people that he reported to were all interrogated, investigated, tried, and found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to prison. He was never interviewed. Instead, he was brought to the United States through Project Paperclip, was set up in Texas. There's a library named after him at one of the Air Force bases in San Antonio, and I think it was around 1975, 76. The Texas legislature named a day after him, an Albertus Struckold Day, to honor him. And that's because he's regarded as the father of aviation medicine in the United States.
Stunning. And
so if you just sort of look at the facts, all of these different scientists from all areas of expertise, including physicians, what are the odds that no psychiatrists were brought over?
Mm-hmm.
Basically zero.
Right.
The problem is the psychiatrists are left out of the documented facts.
Why is that? Because of the MK experiments, you think?
I think that what they were doing was just too wild and too crazy and too frightening and too intolerable. The publicity on it couldn't be tolerated.
Right.
With the rocket program, I mean, you can say, okay, well, the war was over. Now we had the Cold War, we had the space race. We needed these guys, so we had to bring them in. I mean, you can mount an argument.
Right.
But the stuff that the psychiatrists were doing was
unconscionable.
Insane experiments on children.
I know.
Terminal cancer patients, prisoners who were also drug addicts, homeless people, that violated all basic medical ethics, no proper consent, no independent counsel of any kind, no real follow-up, no compensation.
And
it's not tolerable to the public.
And in fact, I think a lot of the reason, like you say, that the Allied countries were trying to get a hold of some of these guys was supposedly their research was above and beyond what other people had accomplished at that point. But much of that, at least on the medical side, was because they were doing experiments that were so outside of what we would consider reasonable to do to human subjects.
The type of experiment would include putting somebody in this would be all death camp prisoners, basically, putting somebody in a specially constructed chamber and instantaneously dropping the pressure in the chamber to the equivalent of 67,000-foot altitude, which then causes people to claw at their faces and basically scream and go through the worst agony possible and then die. And then one thing they did was they took these guys, as soon as they were dead, they took them out of the chamber, dunked them underwater so their heads were under hot water, opened up their scalps, sawed through their skulls, and the reason they wanted them underwater was to see whether any air bubbles bubbled out of their arteries.
Unreal.
So, I mean, it's just absolutely full-tilt medical atrocities. And these are the equivalent things were done by psychiatrists, were then brought over in order to run interrogation, mind control, brainwashing programs.
Wow, absolutely stunning. And just to reiterate to those listening, this is all documented, and there's absolutely no question that this stuff happened. It's just something that's not available through most of your information sources. So.
But an amazing amount of it is just sitting right there waiting to be organized.
Right.
It's not a matter of, I didn't have any deep throat character at all.
Right.
All documents that any citizen can go and obtain.
Boy, and that's, I don't know what that says to me. It's actually quite frightening, I guess, that because you are, quite frankly, the only person that I know of, at least, that has even begun to delve into this particular angle of it. And I think it's probably the most important one that there is.
Well, I'm definitely the only psychiatrist, literally
Right.
the only psychiatrist in the world writing or speaking publicly on this massive violation of human rights by psychiatrists for the last 50-plus years. And it's not that there's really a conspiracy. I mean, I'm sure there's some people conspiring here and there.
Sure.
But the basic way it operates, as far as I can tell, is kind of this old boys network where there's just these don't rock the boat, a gentleman in the club doesn't speak about that because it could be a little uncomfortable for one of the other gentlemen, and nobody wants to talk about it too much because it might affect their career, or their colleagues might frown on them, or somebody might try to discredit them. And a lot of it comes down to just maintaining your grants, trying to keep your academic promotions, maintaining your status in society as a professional.
Right. And we see,
it's not this sort of elaborate conspiracy. It's just the kind of, it's like the mundane aspect of evil,
right,
the reality of evil kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right, I think. And because you see it in many other different areas of human endeavor too, similar things, So, wow, incredible. Well, we did. You touched a little bit about on the history of the actual experimentation. I think let's take a little break here, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the actual historical operations. Maybe we can talk a little bit about Tuskegee.
Sure.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about HREX and the human radiation stuff, if you don't mind, when we come back. So we'll do that, and we'll be back. We'll take a music break here, and I'll be back with my guest, Dr. Colin Ross. Very pleased to have him with us tonight on Radio Orbit. And Dr. Ross, how can people get in touch with you, or how can they find out what you're doing? You have a website address or some phone numbers or something we can give out?
All my books, including Bluebird, are on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And my webpage is www.rossinst.com, which is short for Ross Institute. And my contact email and everything is on the website.
Okay, great. So that's www.rossinst.com. That's ROSSINST.com. Okay, great.
You can just search under Colin Ross, and the Ross Institute comes up.
Okay, great. I'll be back with my guest, Colin Ross, Dr. Colin Ross, in just a moment.
It's also called humanistic therapy.
Right.
So it's like Mr. Nice Guy therapy. Well, lo and behold, Carl Rogers was cleared at top secret. He was a CIA contractor himself, ran experiments for the CIA on subjects, which he published, and just turned into this huge web of relationships and connections involving Yale, Harvard, UCLA, Tulane,
Stanford for sure.
Stanford. So it's not just some mad scientist in a basement somewhere a long time ago.
Right.
It's a stereotype of that is with the client's in there for a therapy session and says, I'm really mad at my mom. And the therapist says, I hear you saying that you're really mad at your mom. It's that kind of touchy-feely. And you're supposed to, number one, value the client, and it's all centered on the best interests of the client. Very organized. It's the main medical schools and a lot of the major figures in psychiatry. For instance, when I was even in medical school, but in psychiatry, I heard about Carl Rogers, who was a psychologist who's identified with this kind of therapy called client-centered therapy in the Christian psychology journals. And he was on the board of a CIA front organization that funneled money from the CIA inside the MKUltra program to the front organization, which then gave grants to academics who didn't realize it was CIA money.
Incredible.
And so a lot of these